Unless you've been living under a rock lately, you may have heard a few familiar words in the gaming industry lately, such as Call of Duty Killer or COD Killer. And thanks to an inspiration from a viewer on stream, today we're going to go into deep conversation about the topic and try to figure out whether Call of Duty itself can be taken down by any other means other than itself. Everyone's answer seems to have always been that COD would kill itself, and some will even say that the game is already doing a great job at that as is. And it really just depends on how you look at it. And what that means is, what would you define as Call of Duty being dead? Or if you look at it from a gameplay perspective, you can argue that the gameplay is not arcadey or more campy and more tactical now in comparison, and therefore Call of Duty is no longer Call of Duty because it isn't the same game from a gameplay standpoint. And there are others that would believe that the only way you can kill a game is to affect its pockets or the amount of money that the game makes. And from both of these perspectives, there are a number of factors that can impact the game in either positive or negative ways. But the other fact to consider is that it is very difficult to predict how this would end. Even with some things being obvious, you simply cannot predict why or how a person or player or consumer would spend or not spend their money on a game. Influence is another factor to consider, because even when people may or may not try something, someone that they know or know of can persuade them to play the game or to buy it for whatever reason. Think about it. Have you ever not wanted to do something but your friends or someone that you know of kind of persuaded you to do it anyway? And all the little factors like brand recognition and stock market also play a role in this as well. So ultimately, as you can see by now, it's not so black and white or cut and dry when it comes to this subject. And that's okay. But for the sake of this discussion, we will break it down as simple as possible. But let's talk about the basic question. Can Call of Duty actually be taken down, or does competition just stay in its lane and do its own thing? Now, while I personally believe that Call of Duty is too big and recognized and backed up by money to be taken down, I also believe that anything is possible. After all, when Call of Duty actually started out, it was a franchise just like any other franchise. So what this means is that any other game or franchise out there can do the same thing. They can start out small and grow into something special. So from this point of view, sometimes the only way to win is not to play, or in other words, you stick to your lane and build from your own foundation and vision and follow through. But is it that simple? The answer is, in theory, yes, but in actuality, making it happen is not so simple. Why is it not so simple? Well, everything requires precise timing, teamwork, money, and luck as well. And neither one of these alone is enough to lead you to success, except perhaps luck. Because if you're lucky enough, you can have the right people developing the game at the right time within the right budget and marketing, and you eventually succeed. This is actually how Call of Duty got its success and continues to succeed financially to this day, despite not being as good as it once was. And this happened over a decade ago, when Call of Duty had reached that level. And I'm sure from a publisher standpoint, I'm sure a question that might have been asked at some point in time was, okay, how do we keep this going? And how do we avoid financial bumps down the road? And this question would be raised every single year since the game comes out every year, being developed by multiple companies. So as you can see, it's hard to take out the rich boy juggernaut when you are a far less rich entity that doesn't resemble anything big, at least not yet. The good news is that there is potential and that there is enough talent out there to compete. If you need some proof of this, let me ask you this. What game franchise was able to put Call of Duty in second place when it came out? The answer is Grand Theft Auto, with Grand Theft Auto 5. Now, with that being said, yes, the game does not come out nearly as often as Call of Duty does, and there's no doubt there. But you cannot ignore the fact that it is proof that it is possible to make things happen, since this actually has happened. So therefore, it can be done. However, it may be done in a different way than one might think. As we mentioned before, timing is everything, no doubt about it. And in this case, the strategy would be it would make more sense if this was more of a marathon instead of a race. This gives another franchise the chance to ultimately build from their vision, and that other franchise, whatever it may be, may or may not release as big as Call of Duty did when it reached that height in the beginning, but there's nothing that says that you cannot build from it. You can always build within the right tools. Now, why would you directly impact things that are under the same category? Or should I say, now, the way that you can actually impact things if you're under the same category. So in other words, you will have to be a sport, so to speak, right? So do you have to be the exact same sport? Probably not. But you do have to be a multiplayer shooter in this case. But you do not have to be a first-person shooter per se. Proof of this is the immense impact that the Battle Royale genre has had on everything over the last handful of years or more, and it made such an impact that even Call of Duty itself was influenced by this. So if you can cause influence, you can also cause damage, or also known as competition, even if it isn't directly. But the interesting question at hand is, does a game like XDefiant even have to compete to surpass and make an impact on Call of Duty? The answer is, well, not really. I mean, it certainly could, but it does not have to. Sometimes being your own thing is the best way to go, and for a numerous amount of reasons. Call of Duty was its own thing back in the beginning when it was back during the day, in the contrast of Halo. And Halo back during its heyday was the big player, and everyone had their eyes on it. So did COD actually directly compete with Halo in order to surpass it? Again, the answer is not really. It did its own thing in ways that Halo did not, that made people fall in love with it because of its ease of access gameplay-wise, and paired with options and yes, even creativity. Halo had a high time to kill aside for the SWAT game modes, but there was no class setup customization, no weapon customization, no weapon decorations, camos, or attachments. There was no progression system, there were no challenges, streaks, and a few other things. So, at least before Halo Reach. So COD would surpass Halo by taking a detour that was a different path that led to the exact same destination, but faster and better. So if history does indeed repeat itself, then XDefiant, or any other game for that matter, must find and create its own detour in order to get to that special destination. And so far, we have seen that although there are similarities between XDefiant and Call of Duty, there are enough differences that differentiate the two in different ways. But fun factor and creativity must remain the main factor, as well as doing what you do best as you can to execute efficiently and properly. Perhaps the best part about all of this is that it's been a while since anyone has even attempted something like this, and over the last decade plus, there's been no other game or even game of its kind to have that kind of impact that Call of Duty has, and times now are different than what they were back then. However, timing is everything, and even Call of Duty itself has changed because of its strategy to take a few pages from other shooters of a different genre like Fortnite. So even though the game has succeeded in making its money through that means, it's left behind the very aspect of its identity that got it to where it is in the first place. So this makes it a perfect time for someone to make something happen, because for the first time in a long time, there is now an opening or a gap in the arcade shooter genre, and thanks to the XDefiant open and closed betas, we now do know that the game genre is not dead, and that there is a significant amount of players that are still not only interested in the arcade shooter genre, but are also passionate about it. All categories of players, ranging from the casual, the above average, the hardcore fan, and even the amateur and pro players, have unanimously supported the game and have expressed not only support, but excitement. And at this day and age, it is something truly special for something like this to happen, because one of the essential elements to success when having your work cut out for you in any endeavor is teamwork, or strength in numbers. And to have the entire community united in this way is absolutely phenomenal, especially now when there's more competition than ever and voices heard due to social media and the politics of gaming to consider. This is all proof of potential, but as stated before, it's not just about making an impact, it's also about consistency as well. So consistency is everything. So how do you stay so consistent when you have a game where a new sequel is not coming out every single year? Back in the day, World of Warcraft was able to accomplish this through expansions, and it worked. And it's still effective to this day. CSGO has managed to remain relevant for many years for reasons of its own as well. I feel this is important to mention simply because it is very easy for facts like this to escape people and to go unnoticed for reasons of unfamiliarity. And the fact is that when it comes to what goes on with games behind the scenes, the majority of players are not aware of it. But with that being said, this is also a good thing that XDefiant is not simply copying and pasting everything, because not every decision or addition to Call of Duty has been a good one. For example, most players have no idea these days that the EOMM algorithm that rigs the game and therefore leaves the game on an uneven playing field, and therefore compromises the integrity of the game and takes away from the optimal fun factor of that game, not just from good players, but from bad players as well. And personally, I'm glad that XDefiant is not implementing EOMM into their game, or even SBMM in casual play, and therefore keeping things on a much more fair and even playing field regardless of the skill of the player is important and a good way to go. And speaking from experience, the fun factor in every and any game out there, whether it's competitive or not, is what keeps players coming back for more, because it's how a game feels, how a game plays, how a game rewards, and excites, that keeps players coming back for more. And for a percentage of these players, it even influences them to figure out how to get better or how to play a game in a way that increases the fun factor, whether it's playing with friends, trying something goofy, or handicapping yourself, or changing things up in a way that you wouldn't normally do. And EOMM does not encourage this at all, and as a matter of fact, it does the exact opposite. So the example of EOMM is, simply put, an ingredient that does not belong in any game in terms of competitive and casual multiplayer, and yet it still gives the results, at least for the time being. It's basically compared to steroids. For now, they may give you results, but at what cost in the long run? And speaking of the long run, I have heard on a stream podcast that it is possible that Call of Duty may not last forever, and that one way or another it will eventually drop, or who knows, it may never drop. Will Call of Duty actually always be around? Lots of franchises that are successful and had stood the test of time to this day, and all the games that I could think off the top of my head certainly deserve it. I once heard in a movie that someone said, hey, since when does deserving mean anything? So if it isn't going to happen, it just isn't going to happen. And the only way to make it happen is through help, and perhaps for someone to expose the BS in a big way. We've had that happen with Why So Serious in his videos and live streams. And if it wasn't for 8 Thoughts basically shouting him out, I personally would have never known of this at the time, or maybe even ever, and perhaps you wouldn't either. There are a lot of layers to this entire thing, and peeling back layer by layer, as 402 Thunder likes to say, is something that requires time, it requires consistency, and even some luck. So if this is true, then as a community, we need to continue to support XDefiant and its developers. Granted, they stay the path of honesty, transparency, and integrity, as they have been doing since entering the picture. But only time will tell if this persists. But as stated in the beginning of this commentary, it will take teamwork and even in some order to become a juggernaut to beat COD, but to not compete with it directly, because not going the same path is the easier path to take. And I feel that it is also the right path to take, especially now that COD isn't the arcade shooter anymore. So a COD alternative or COD replacement is the better way to go, instead of just being an outright Call of Duty clone. Plus, calling XDefiant a Call of Duty clone is actually disrespectful at this point in time, especially since it is actually not a COD clone when you don't judge it by its cover. And we all know how most people will judge everything by its cover. The same thing applies to gaming, since the game has already been given the title of COD Killer, or people just outright saying it's COD. And sure, at the surface, there is a resemblance of that classic Call of Duty look and feel, but a pre-made lasagna that you can pick up in a frozen box at a grocery store is not the same thing as a homemade lasagna made by your Italian grandmother. And in the world of video games, it is easier to not see the difference, because most people simply still prematurely judge the game by its cover and not take enough time to notice the difference. And one misconception is that simple is bad, and although that I can understand to a certain degree that point of view, simple does not have to be boring. Sometimes less is more. So what does this mean? Well, does the game need to have a ridiculous number of maps and modes and other features like kill streaks? The answer is no. While those features may mean more to some players, it does not mean that is the end-all be-all. Remember, XDefiant is not Call of Duty, and nor is it trying to be. And that is a great thing that will pay off in the long run at some point. Think about it. All the content that the game will have, for the most part, will be original, such as the alternative game modes that we will have at launch and post-launch, the maps and post-launch maps, the color palette used, the factions, etc. It's the combination of these little things that sets you apart from your peers, and yes, even from your competition. And if the combination of those things is put together correctly and uniquely, you have a foundation that will withstand quite a lot. And XDefiant has the essential material for this foundation. It has the gameplay, the maps, the weapons, the factions, the world, the modes, and the right developers behind it all. And we say the same thing for Call of Duty nowadays. Even an unlimited budget isn't enough if you do not have the right players behind the wheel. Need proof? Microsoft has the deepest pockets out of any major developer, any major player out there, and still has trouble getting great exclusives out there, like Sony and Nintendo can. And Nintendo also runs on weaker hardware than both Sony and Microsoft. And as a matter of fact, Nintendo is in first place, despite this. So who is to say that XDefiant cannot accomplish something similar in due time? Perhaps the publisher and devs see this, and it may be the driving force behind the game. Sometimes moving to the beat of your own drum and not to the competitor's drum is the best way to go. And to give one more example, Microsoft has tried to beat Sony at their own game and has failed. which is what made Microsoft realize that they have to actually have their own vision and follow through on that vision by having their own philosophy, and instead of using the philosophy of their competitor. And this realization led them to create something that is keeping them relevant in the gaming industry world today, and in the future perhaps, and that is Game Pass. So when you look at these few examples, XDefiant does not need to be Call of Duty in order to beat it. It would actually be counterproductive to take that approach. And the more efficient and unique the game continues to be in the future while keeping its foundation intact, it's going to succeed. So therefore, XDefiant needs to be itself in every update, every season, every new feature, which brings me to the next subject within the conversation, Battle Royale. While XDefiant would make a good Battle Royale, I believe that creating one, especially now, and especially maybe even in the near future, may be self-destructive for the game. The reason for this is simple. Look what is happening to Call of Duty now. Besides money, has the franchise actually gotten better overall? Is the community happy? Has the overall quality of the game been up to par? Even from a Battle Royale standpoint, the answer is sadly no. So why is this? It's because the people in charge value the dollar above all else. And to a certain degree, from a legal perspective, because they have to make the shareholders happy, legally. And it has gotten to the point to where the dollar is valued over the quality of the game, because if they know that they can get away with giving you something of lower quality at less cost to out of their pockets, and yet still make the projected earnings, then why not? Fast food franchises do this, as well as other entities among all walks of life and business and entertainment. So then the question is now, how do you compete with something like that? And perhaps the answer is that, well, you don't. You stay the path, you remain true to yourself, but why? Because you can't have one without the other. You cannot have day without night. So therefore, you cannot have one without the other. And right now, things are a little uneven because we've had too much of one and not enough of the other. We are long overdue for something real and legit and non-artificial. This is why XDefiant has the potential to succeed. And the cool thing about it is that in the first place, that it is the first game in a long time to even step up to the plate and has a shot at hitting a home run and potentially inject a dose of goodness and success into the particular part of the gaming world. All it needs is our support and consistency from the devs on their part. So what is the best case scenario? What if XDefiant actually does reach its full potential? While it is hard to predict the future, the fact is that history has and does repeat itself. So what might happen? More arcade shooters would be developed, and this could bring about more variety and fun within the genre and its fan base. More devs and publishers can be influenced to change their approach to creating games for the overall better. The competitive scene will be expanded, and we will see more players and content creators coming out of the woodworks. More jobs within the industry will be filled, and money within the industry will improve even more, and more charity events will actually happen that will generate money towards a good cause. Given all this will definitely take time, but we've got to start somewhere, and XDefiant is no different, and I believe that the time to start is now, and the wheels have started turning already, and hopefully come launch, things will operate as smooth as possible. When Season 1 hits 6 weeks later, we can smoothly move forward, and one update, one season, one tweet, one video, one stream, and one event at a time, toward the ultimate goal of making these games the way they should be again. Thank you all very much for taking the time to watch and or listen, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.